And he's like, I got a bag. It has $20,000 in cash. He's like, if you can tell me I'm good to go and I can pass, I'll get up, I'll walk away. The bag stays here, and then that's it. We're good. I'm like, honestly, I would, love to take you up on that, but unfortunately, I can't. I have a family to take care of. This is too much of an ethics risk for me, and I can't do it.
Welcome to Customer Unsuccess, the podcast where we cut out the noise and talk with real leaders about their hardest lessons in customer success and other go-to-market motions. I'm your host, Joe DeGrande, and in each episode, we're going to unpack real challenges from real leaders, failed tech implementations, a strategy that didn't yield results, or difficult customers. But more importantly, we're going to take those lessons learned and share them with you so that way you can avoid those same mistakes with your team. So if you're in customer success, sales, or other go-to-market motions, stick around to hear from the best. Now let's dig into it. Our guest today is Jerry Van Vort. He's a winemaker turned VP of Customer Success at Vort. And after crafting fine wines and even diving into the cannabis industry, Jerry now leads a customer success team and shares a story of how he uncovered a flood of fake leads and had to navigate those disgruntled customers as a result. He even talked about a bizarre story where he refused a $20,000 cash bribe. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do too. Now let's dive in. Awesome. Should we kick this off?
Let's do it. I like it.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jerry, for coming on the Customer Unsuccess podcast. Those of you who don't know Jerry is a VP of Customer Success at Vort and many years as a VP and in customer success as a whole. So I'm excited to hear your stories, Jerry.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me on, Joe, and I kind of look forward into jumping into a few scenarios.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, I know we had a couple of conversations, prior, to the recording, and it's interesting, I guess, the blend of I guess essentially like your offering and then how it impacts kind of downstream to customer success, especially after post sales, right? And we see this quite a bit, right? And there's always the complaints of like, hey, like we're proper expectation set, with new business, but more importantly, like, hey, is the product or the offering, whatever that might be, really delivering the impact to the customer? And obviously as a CSM or in customer success, account management, you name your vernacular, are they able to kind of just keep the ship afloat, for lack of a better phrase, right? Like, and making sure that they could navigate those customer conversations. So I know you had some stories around that, and, happy to very interested in you diving in.
Yeah. I think that is a good point. I think it's something that you find a lot in customer success. There's always the little bit of the over promising, under delivering kind of thing on the sales side that you're stuck with. But occasionally, and I think it's a area that you really try to navigate out of and not be in any customer success role is core product issues, because if anyone's dealing with it, it's going to be you. And I'm a decent sales guy, but it's hard always to put my name or put myself behind something that you can't feel 100% confident in. I'm definitely not a snake oil salesman. And I think, you kind of end up in either two different routes, and depending on, your kind of your sales style or type. And if you really like delivering value and you like to see that outcome and see where that, goes in the customer life cycle, I think that's where you end up in customer success. If you derive a lot of joy from just the transaction, then you end up in sales. So, for me, product is super important. And there was a company that I worked for, fairly large company, especially in the internet, domain space. And it's really a portfolio of companies all under a single brand. So I was at a company. It's a pretty large company on the internet space. They encompass a couple different verticals, everything from like automotive to healthcare to travel. And so I was working in the legal vertical, and they brought me on basically because they hadn't had a director of customer success in about 5 years, roughly. And so, I'm a very ambitious person. I like problem solving. I think that's something that, most people in customer success, if you're successful, are good at is problem solving. Um, and so, kind of coming into a situation where there hadn't been as much structure and they needed, some leadership and some guidance, and they were looking for all that, and that's why they wanted to bring somebody on. Wasn't enticing to me. So, I come on. Normally when I go on to an organization, I'm usually pretty quiet. I don't kind of come in, banging on doors and just, making a big rumble right away. Usually I come in, I'm very observant. I'm, kind of gathering information, seeing who the, key players are in the organization, who's, my A team, within my direct reports. And then I kind of start to make moves.
Sure.
So, it didn't take long though, kind of getting in and getting the feel for the situation and getting the, a sense of what was going on, to realize that this team that I'm assuming, really has really just been running autonomously as a headless, machine for the last 5 years. And what's great about the company is that they do a lot of internal promotion. And I like that. When you go to an organization, you feel like there's a ladder for you to move up. The problem is when you're not bringing enough outside talent in the mix of all that, is that you end up stuck in more antiquated, workflows and ways of managing your team and growing and evolving as technology changes. And so the person that they'd had as a director even 5 years before I got there is one of those cases where they had moved up in the leadership role. And so, really it just becomes for most cases, when someone moves up a ladder like that, it becomes a continuation of doing the things they'd done before, and not necessarily changing the map. So what I noticed was that everything that they had been doing was really out of place. None of the account managers or customer success managers were getting tracked on any metrics whatsoever.
Wow.
The only thing that was really being tracked was churn, and important metric.
Of course.
But once I started looking into, what is everybody doing all day long? Of course, there was a manager under the director. That manager had been with the company for over 10 years. What had occurred was that over that time, as a manager, they had all the, tier one or, marquee accounts that they had started to assume. And it got to the point where they weren't even managing anybody. They were just a top tier, account manager. And occasionally spending time dealing with escalations from the account managers. So as far as adding structure, improving, observing the team, setting goals, no time for that. And so that was pretty apparent when I got in there. When I started looking at who was making phone calls, who wasn't making phone calls, who was closing tickets, how long was it taking to close tickets, I really realized I got myself into a pretty big rat's nest. But that's what I wanted. I wanted to get into something that had some problems that needed to get fixed. So,
sure.
So that seemed simple enough. I started adding structure to the organization, creating, some KPIs for the team. But in that kind of exercise and going through all that, I'm also starting to now, get more purview to client communications, listening in and finding out what escalations are going on. And as I did that, it started to look pretty quickly that there was a potential product issue. And not just a product issue, but some of the service aspects of that as well. So the main thing that we did as an organization is that we sold leads to law firms that were needing, potential new cases.
Makes sense.
And since, the company I work for has a lot of internet properties, it really is a lucrative aspect of their business because they get a lot of web traffic. And if they can parlay that traffic into a lead they can sell, then, all the better. The problem was before I got to this organization, in an effort for growth, or maybe it's exposure, or just to, make investors feel more confident. There was obviously a supply and demand. There's a lot of demand for these leads. Law firms, it's almost unlimited demand. They'll take as many leads as they can as long as they're good cases they can close.
Makes sense.
The problem is that is the quality of the leads and our ability to source them all.
Hmm.
So somewhere along the lines, there was a leader who decided that, well, let's just open the floodgates and let's start selling more leads. And in order to do that, we need to bring in more leads. And if we are maxing out our own properties, then we have to use affiliates.
Hmm.
So that's the course that they went prior to me coming on board. The problem is that not too long after this happened, that leader left, and the new leader came in, and I'm assuming at that point did not review the current process and realized that there wasn't a lot of checks and balances in that deployment. So what I was finding was that a lot of these firms were complaining that they were getting leads that were never submitted by the consumer. They would call the lead. They'd say, "Hey, I don't know how you got my phone number. I didn't have a car accident, or I'm not getting a divorce, or whatever it may be. I don't need any legal assistance."
Hmm.
And not all of those calls where they would call someone unsolicited would have that response. Sometimes in some cases, it's even another lawyer that they'd called that says, "I'm going to sue you guys for calling me without my permission."
Wow.
So then we're getting the call being told that we're going to get sued. Or I'm going to get sued, either or.
Sure.
So it really turned into a pretty big snowball pretty quick. And part of the problem was not just that the service was broken and that we're selling leads that were never submitted by the consumer, but their crediting process. So we have a credit process in place to address leads that were, not submitted by the consumer, disconnected number. We have some criteria there. But the way that criteria was developed really did not play into the advantage of what the issue was. So they would submit for credit, not get credit, and then they'd end up paying and getting stuck with these leads that are truly not submitted by anybody.
Wow.
So one of the first things I had to do was try to put a Band-Aid on the situation, was address the credit policy. So we, initially made some credit policy adjustments to try to make it a little bit more convenient. So if they are getting these leads, for the most part, we can get their money back, but it's not guaranteed. And the problem is that the huge cost for the company to validate the leads, because we're sending all these off to a call center to then call and validate what our clients are saying is true. The problem is if we couldn't get in touch with them, how do we validate? In that sense, so that was a big aspect of it was, the inability to validate the claims made by the client, so then that we can credit them for something that they are validly credited for. So that obviously caused more contention, but we did make some improvements to the credit policy that helped ease some of that tension. And then I was immediately surfacing all this information, to my leader, which reported directly under the COO of the full organization. And at that point, we started having a lot of more dev meetings, and then trying to really work with a product manager to suss out what kind of securities and fail safes can we insert into our process to have more legitimate leads that we're selling. And then as well as what kind of our channel partnerships managers with these affiliates, like how are we policing them, and what are the consequences to them for providing us with leads that either they sourced or they acquired somehow that are validly not legitimate. So it took a lot of tough discussions, and there was some pushback at the top. I mean, I think when you're in an organization, I think either private or public, especially one that relies on investors, you have metrics that you've given to that you're supposed to achieve. So to go and say like, hey, 35% or 40% of our business, the stuff that we're selling isn't legit. We need to cut it. We need to cut it back. Like, it's kind of a non-starter. You can't almost go that route. So you're in a bit of a conundrum. And I mean, the challenge really is, for the most part, the clients would honestly, they would pay more for higher quality leads instead of low cost, high quantity. But then they had to spend a bunch of their time going through and chasing tails. So there was some options there of what could have happened. We could have just cut the floodgates off, increased the price, and then I think they would have been happy as well. And then we would have felt better ethically. But that really wasn't the option that I had to play with. So during probably the next 6 months, were really interesting, as we're trying to make these rapid changes in development. And in an organization, you know, for that organization at least, but in what I've seen in large organizations, for the most part, the dev teams don't move as fast as they do in small
Sure.
startups. So, you're sitting there pulling your teeth out, dealing with problems every day that you're having to, talk clients off the ledge for, and while you're just kind of twiddling your thumbs, hoping that they can get the, resolutions in place quickly.
Yeah.
The great thing about the organization that that was in was that since we were in multiple verticals, we did have teams with different skill sets that we were able to kind of parlay into the conversation that really assisted in ramping up and expediting the resolution to this issue. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting challenge to go through. And then in an antiquated team that you assume there was more than just even that. So there's the product problems, there's the structure of the team problems, and then obviously the big thing for the team really was attrition. I couldn't even get people to stay in the team until I got there. They were having a lot of trouble keeping people and even hiring anybody.
Wow.
Because they hadn't updated anything with their pay structure in probably 5 or 6 plus years as well. And because there wasn't anybody to advocate for them.
Sure.
There was no director, there was nobody there, and general manager was just looking at too large of a purview to really pay attention to individual teams. So I had to also spend a bunch of time mapping out and building a new pay and incentive structure, and then had to advocate for getting new tools brought to the team, like that. Maybe sales was the queen. They were getting everything they wanted.
Sure.
But success did not, and we were really lacking. We really just had Salesforce, and that's not a great customer success tool in itself, solely. So we started bringing on things like outreach, which really helped in the email cadence and communication. Reducing a lot of the time spent there just checking on clients. And then a lot of training for the team to get them up to speed and then as well as cross-selling. There's obviously lots of different businesses with even just the legal vertical that we offer services for, but a lot of team members didn't even know what those services were or how to speak to them.
Yeah.
So, I think there was a lot of interesting challenges there, but I think the biggest one was really just dealing with clients that I remember, even on Thanksgiving, I'm in the store getting some last minute groceries, and I was on vacation that day but I had a team member call me and say, hey, I'm getting I have an escalation ride. I need you to jump on with. The guy's literally threatening to file suit.
Wow.
And so lots of talking people off a ledge.
Yeah,
lots of it.
No, that's definitely a lot to unpack, and I think a couple of pieces that kind of are great call outs. One, I think the biggest theme here is it's almost like growing too fast, so to speak, right? Like I think you kind of called it out in the beginning, right? There was a ton of demand but not enough supply, and that's kind of essentially the well was dried up, right? So they kind of not without much essentially like a deeper research and understanding of like what the process should look like, they kind of just went full reactive mode, which even in like a CS side, as far as like if you're reactive, it's going to lead you into a lot of troubles as opposed to being a little bit more proactive, right? And they were not auditing and creating a process for those partnerships. So process is a big piece of this as well, right? Like it seems like understanding like, hey, who exactly are we partnering with? Can they get the job done? And then also too, like, it sounds like, I guess, would you agree it's also a little bit of like customer listening, so to speak? Because I think also you mentioned about like, the feedback from the customers, at least again, more of the reaction to it was like, hey, we want it more quality over quantity. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best way to put it, is that, we created our own growing pains.
Yeah.
And we didn't need to go down that path. It looks nice, and when you have something shiny that says I can make more revenue.
Yeah.
But really, I think without investigating that further, especially with, involving the clients, in that discussion, you can lead yourself astray, and that's kind of what we did. And the reality is that we could have really increased the quality of our current product, and then decrease the price. Obviously, even then, you're going to get some blowback from clients whenever you do a price change, especially if it's an increase.
Sure.
But I don't think you're going to get threatened with suits You're not gonna, have a lot of the issues that you're gonna run into when you go a more nefarious route.
No, 100%. I think, yeah, to avoid a lot of headaches that that you experience, I would say taking a step back is kind of is a good first step in this case. Developing that
Absolutely.
process, and then also too, I think it goes back to like the value of the product, right? I think that's a key theme here too, because once you start to focus, like you said, like on that quantity versus quality, it's almost like no matter what you're charging, it's like, okay, now the customer's already perceiving this, hey, this is, inferior to whatever you name your data provider, that there's tons out there, that, they're just going to essentially jump ship. And, or in this case, it looks like file soup, but hopefully no one else experiences that. But I'm curious now. So like, now that you've experienced this, right, Jerry, like you had a lot of learnings, right? There was a lot of downstream impact, right? You mentioned nutrition, keeping employees, obviously customers, right? It's kind of a domino effect. But I guess like now having this background, I guess like how have you changed your mindset and the way you approach things coming in as like a new person coming in, right? Because that's common, right? And I think it's very smart. A lot of organizations should be thinking about like having a new fresh set of eyes of someone coming in to from a a bird's eye view. But what is like, I guess like your take on now how to avoid those, essentially, or just get even more aware of those, those challenges, so that way it doesn't get deeper and deeper into the hole.
I mean, I guess if you're if you're in the situation like where you're applying for a role and you're looking for some more feedback, it's hard to really get a company to get those skeletons out of their closet
Sure.
in the interview process, um, with the fear that maybe scaring you away.
Of course.
So I think how you ask that question is going to be super important. So then that way you can convey confidence to whoever you're interviewing with for a particular role, that you know you do like these challenges, you do like to solve these problems, and that honesty goes a long way. Um, but even then, I think you're always going to kind of walk into a few things that got swept under the rug, or weren't totally foreclosed to you before you got on into the role.
Sure.
Um, but I think not asking the questions is just going to be a disservice to yourself. So one of the questions I always ask, even just for like a startup, is what does your runway look like?
Mm,
So there's certain key questions that you need to ask. I think for any organization, of what's the product quality, what's the number one complaint that customers give you, um, and how do you address it? If there was one thing that you wanted to change around the organization to improve its success, what would it be? So I think asking the right pointed questions and not just being the interviewee, but also an interviewer during your interviews, would hopefully shed enough light. And honestly, if you don't get even an ounce of clarity from those questions, then maybe that's enough of a red flag already, to give you a sense that maybe there's something that they're hiding, that you're just going to end up getting yourself into a mess. Um, but yeah, I think that would probably be the best way, just to start off the conversation, to see if what you're getting into before you get into it.
awesome. No, I think that's great advice, for the audience. And I think also, that advice in general, it's always just for understanding like true objections or true problems, right? Whether it's with a customer or interviewing for a position, asking and kind of listening to people's responses in kind of the undertones. I think it's super important to kind of get the true answer. What's interesting, Jerry? I know we had on our prep call, we were talking about kind of like more personal interests. We are talking about like, even the wine industry, as well. And then also you have actually background, obviously, in the alcohol industry as well as the cannabis industry. And I know we were talking about a couple of different stories of interesting challenges that you've experienced along the way. And I can't recall if they were CS related or just, go to market in general, but I know, there's some interesting stories that, the audience would probably love to learn, and like some of the challenges there too, because it's always interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So and even just like with the last scenario with the company I was just talking about,
Yeah.
a lot of things kind of roll into like ethics,
Sure.
and like on the customer success side of things, you have a lot of opportunities sometimes to um, make decisions that impact obviously the customer or an organization, and it's you end up in a weird spot on a fence of how much of a customer advocate am I, or how much of an employee of the organization am I, and it gets tough because you really do in your role need to be the customer advocate for the organization, pushing that agenda across all the different channels, because the more customer centric an organization is, the easier it is to sell the product, the better the product becomes, the less support issues that you have. And at the end of the day, the more customer centric you are, the easier your job becomes because you've improved the process and resolved a lot of issues. And then you face less of those on the support side. So, but interesting though, in the cannabis side of things, so I got into that after being in the wine industry. I started was tracking trends in the wine industry and seeing some decline in beverage consumption. And then there was a lot of regulatory changes in a lot of states going legal cannabis. So I thought it was kind of like the pick and shovel movement of a whole new growing industry that has just started to bloom. And that's a $1 billion industry. So I figured I'd get in and get my feet wet early. And so I made a transition from wine into cannabis. And from winemaking actually to now customer success, and everything I'd kind of done had customer success aspects of it, especially in working a lot of small mom and pops. You end up wearing multiple hats, and post sale service is a big portion of that.
For sure.
Especially as a winemaker, any problems in the wine, any problems with anything, you're the person that made it. So best to answer that. Post sales education series and things like that. So very, very translatable. But so got into the cannabis industry, ended up getting a job for what was, and I think might still be, the largest network of cannabis testing labs in the world. And so it's a very niche thing. And given there's a ton of new regulations, and each state has its own regulations, there's not like an overarching federal regulation because it's not federally legal yet.
Yep.
There's a lot of nuances that occurred. And so with that, the company I decided to work for wasn't only just a lab, it was a software company. So it developed its own laboratory information management software, and then we would franchise out the brand and the software to licensees. So we would license out the product and the services that we perform, all the methodologies for the testing and everything as well.
Sure.
And so we not only went through the cannabis regulations, but we went through like the FDA. The FDA came out with the hemp bill, and so hemp became something now that was able to be grown legally, and then had its own process. Though the process for regulated cannabis, as in like the stuff that has THC that's going to get you high,
Yep.
is different regulations than what the Farm Bill covers with hemp. So regulated cannabis, you buy in a dispensary, that's got to be tested for, depending on the state, regulation is different, but usually it's going to be like the cannabinoids concentration, like the THC, the psychoactives. It's going to be like, yeast and mold, or mycotoxins, which is the byproduct of the yeast and mold, heavy metals, pesticides, things like that. Hemp, though, doesn't have any of those requirements. They only care that it doesn't have THC and it's not going to get you high. So we were doing some testing for the now rolling out of the hemp testing requirements, now that the Farm Bill is released. So we went to a farm, we did random sampling of his plants, and we brought them back to the laboratory to run tests to verify that they're within the legal limits. And unfortunately, they came back as not in the legal limits. And this guy had acres, because it's an outdoor grow, so acres of cannabis. So, and this is his first harvest of hemp, so obviously a lot of investment in here.
Sure.
And so he calls me. He's like, "How's the test going?" Well, I'm like, "Well, not looking too good." And he's like, "Okay, well, maybe I should come in for an in-person meeting." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, sure, come on in." So he comes in, and he's with his girlfriend, and I mean, this is a really interesting industry to work in, Ricardo. the people you work with, from suits to, deadheads to everybody. It's really interesting. But so the guy comes in, and we come into my office. He sets a bag down, and then he's like, "So, I hear we got a problem." I'm like, "Well, yeah, it doesn't look like you're going to pass testing. So, we really got to work on, some preemptive testing down the road. So we're doing this way in advance, so you're not ending up in the situation in the future." He's like, "Well, I can't end up in the situation now."
Mm.
And he's like, "I got a bag that's sitting. I just sat down. It has $20,000 in cash." He's like, "If you can tell me I'm good to go and I can pass, I'm good. I'll get up. I'll walk away. The bag stays here, and then that's it. We're good." I'm like, honestly, I would, love to take you up on that, but unfortunately, I can't.
Wow.
I have a family to take care of, and with what I get paid per year, it like that 20K doesn't compensate for, like, it's just too much of an ethics risk for me,
Hmm.
and I can't do it. So luckily the guy was nice, and fortunately down the road, even though he ended up failing and they had to destroy all that crop. Like,
Wow.
this is like, probably like a $500,000 investment, just bulldozed. But because of the ethics that I had displayed in that moment, later on down the line, he actually reached out to me and trying to offer me a job. So it goes a long way. It goes a long way, I think, being ethical in your decision making process. That, even if it's not the news the client wants to hear, it's your, resolve in that situation, and the trust that they can develop, and how you handle it and how you navigate it, that I think really can come out the other side in a good, positive way.
Yeah.
But that's just one of the, like, I can go further if you want on some of the stories that I had there.
No, for sure. This is great. I mean, I think, like, listening to the story, it's actually interesting. It brought back another story similar to, I actually visited a cidery and mini winery in New York, and they actually had a similar problem where their cider had too much alcohol content to be cider, but then it couldn't be wine, and they were just in this, like, essentially purgatory, and they just had it's sitting in the vat, and it just, you can't do anything. Obviously, probably not as costly as cannabis, but it's pretty crazy. It's a good story, but I think it's also, too, it's a great story because it's understanding, well, one, you brought up ethics, which I think it's actually super, super important too. Like, I think it doesn't come up often in customer success and just business in general. It's maybe just the underlying subconscious. Sometimes it comes up, but, like, to kind of be more self-aware about it, right? Like, hey, what do I do that's the most ethical thing I could do to better a customer? It's kind of the main takeaway here. And also, too, I think the risk is a big piece of it too, when it comes down to, obviously, in that case, as a business owner, right, there's that chance that it might, or regulatory change, regulations might change, and you might need to pivot, and then it might be too late. Same thing applies, I think, even in the SaaS tech world. There's tons of regulations on, maybe, like, for instance, like how you should be charging customers in terms of auto renewal. Those changes are constant. And you just need to be privy in it, and understand there's always a risk in any of this stuff. I think, just keeping in mind at the time, I'm curious if you do have one quick one, and then we'll wrap up, because I'm always intrigued by these. These are great.
Yeah, yeah. So probably the other, crazy aspect of working for that organization was, just because it was such a new industry, there was a lot of money coming into it, and a lot of easy money coming into it. A lot of investors wanted to get involved because there was a lot of, it seemed really lucrative.
Sure.
And so we were able to raise a lot of money. We went through a seed round, a Series A, I actually got to, like, a series, maybe C, and that was probably the more unfortunate aspect of things, because we didn't expect to have to raise more money.
Wow.
But in going through it, so when I started with the organization, I was probably maybe employee 12, number 12 maybe. And then at our peak, while I was there, probably maybe one of maybe 150. So we grew pretty quick, and that was probably in like 12 months. So really, really rapid growth. And so, when you grow, you make mistakes and things like that. But one of the, big mistakes that we made is that we were too busy growing and not enough focused on the organization and the growth and how that growth was occurring. So, we made a lot of mistakes in hiring. We made a lot of mistakes in building out structure and focusing on our core industry. Because at the time, our headquarters was in California. We were licensing out in our, methodology and the software across the nation and worldwide. And so in licensing out, we had to, worry about each state's regulations and what they're doing and what they're not doing. And so we can develop the methodologies to apply to those particular scenarios in those states. But what we didn't spend enough time was even our core market, our California market. There's other problems in the California market, and I'm sure you may have heard them on the news, but taxes, the rollout of the regulated cannabis industry in California really got kind of butchered based on too many hands out. A lot of cities wanted to get paid, counties wanted to get paid, the state wanted to get paid. So just really just overtaxed the industry, and then kept people in the black market because of affordability. But what had happened was, we faced all these challenges, and our CEO kept focusing on growth and not structure. And so we got to an inflection point where, we were losing money, and we kept going back for more at the well, and the well started saying, hey, we're not giving you anything until things change. And it got to the point where I had an interview with the board and kind of give them, being the customer centric guy, you kind of have a pulse on most of the organization, almost more than almost anybody in the organization, because you know what's getting sold, you know how it's being sold, you know what the customer is asking for, what they're not asking for, what your competitors are doing, what your competitors are not doing. You know how other teams in the organization are supporting the customer and the business's growth. So I was a really key person in the middle of all of that. And so after kind of discussing things with the board, they made the decision to have some of our investors who had a different class of share between common stock and whatnot and preferred shares, convert their shares over, so that then the board had more say than the CEO, because the CEO was also invested in the company. So they actually ousted the CEO, and the CEO had been drama the whole time. I remember being at a conference in Vegas where at the Las Vegas Convention Center, the biggest cannabis conference in the world. And we're sitting there at the booth, and somebody comes by with these flyers, and it's like, hey, is this your guys' CEO? I'm like, look at it. And it was this whole like one page, like, this guy is crazy, narcissist, like just bashing this guy crazy and the company, which I work for.
Wow.
And so my name's kind of on it. So I go around like, where'd you find this? He's like, well, if someone's handing it out at all these like tables for people eating lunch. So I go over there, and I'm literally taking flyers out of people's hands. And before I get back to our booth, after saving our dignity with all these flyers, this guy who I guess had created them, like literally attacked our CEO at the expo, like at the booth. My boss, our CEO, literally had to like pull this guy off. The police had to come. Whole crazy, like, who is you did not expect it.
Wow.
And then so obviously after he was ousted, it was nice to have him gone.
Sure.
Unfortunately, they kept replacing him with people who didn't know the industry, didn't know our customers, and maybe thought they were too good to really spend a bunch of time with people like me and other people in the organization to get that information.
Wow.
Or they were just too interim, that their focus wasn't really on the company. And so we ended up going through 5 CEOs in 5 years.
Wow.
So
that's
fun. And each time you got to reinvent yourself with each one of them, and you got to like display why you're important, why you, especially when the company at this time is the well's kind of gotten dry and went through about 4 or 5 different layoff iterations, and actually got to the point where I was like now employee 3 of 3. So wow. I rode the ship down to the end until it was the Titanic was sinking. But I don't recommend that. But it was a fun journey, though. It really interesting.
It definitely a learning experience. I guess the main thing is you never know what you're going to get, and I guess it's part of the startup culture. Again, it's startup problems, so to speak. Not to say that every startup is like that. I think that's a pretty unique story, but interesting nonetheless. I mean, it is a learning experience, and it just goes to show you, what a turbulent environment a company can have. But as far as we wrap up here, Jerry, thanks so much for these stories. These were awesome. I'm just curious, in terms of like your experience, like where do you go to learn? Like, I don't know if there's any books that you've recommended and you've read in your past, or courses or things of that nature. But I'm always curious and ask my guests, like, hey, what is something that you always kind of turn to?
Yeah. So I'm not always the best standard proactive learner. I do try to always like evolve. I like learning. I would say I'm a lifelong learner, but I always find that I learn best when I have a passion or a problem to solve.
Hmm.
So I'm always passionate about customer success. I'm always trying to learn what I can there. So I'm trying to pay attention to what's going on in the industry. Spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, reading obviously articles and new things coming out. I try to involve myself in any kind of like webinars or anything that it's hit or miss with those things. Sometimes you get caught into some kind of sales thing and it's not even really educational.
Sure.
But I'm always trying to stay in front of the trends, especially with AI. The company I work for now, we have our own AI product, so that really kind of reinforces that need to be aware of the industry. But other than that, really, I think I spend a lot of time whenever I have a problem or a question or something I can't resolve, trying to find out how I can do it better. And I think that's better motivation, and I have better memory retention when it's something that I'm actually like I can put a context behind it. And so, whenever I find a new or unique problem, or I'm always digging for problems, I'm always trying to find problems. And so, and sometimes there's not even a problem. Sometimes it's just thinking about what could happen or what might happen. And I think that's that proactive problem solving before a problem actually happens, and that foresight really is super imperative in resolving issues in structure, especially as you're mapping and building things out for the first time. But it also drives me to then learn more all the time about what I could do, or what is there. When you have an idea, just Google it, because a lot
Sure.
of times if you have an idea for a platform or product, either it could be something entrepreneurially you can pursue on your own if there is not anything out there, but more than likely you're going to find something that's going to meet your needs.
Awesome. No, I love it. Thank you so much for that, Jerry. I think it's super important. Also, too, like even I think there's so much out there. Even like with AI and ChatGPT, Anthropic. I mean, there's tons of different things. But you're right. Passion should be the driver, and I think that's it's some great advice. And I guess like to wrap things up, where can everybody find you, Jerry?
Right now, just LinkedIn.
Nice.
I probably should to start like a blog or a podcast or something myself, but find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Good stuff. We'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes for sure. That way everybody can find you. But thanks so much for the great stories, Jerry. Really enjoyed our time together, and thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Joe. Appreciate it. Anytime.
That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got some value from this conversation, hit subscribe, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who's also out there trying to build a better customer success or go-to-market strategy, even if it's messy along the way. And if you want more frameworks, tools, automated playbooks, check out jodastechtouch.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for being here. Keep building, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one. Quick note before we wrap. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions shared here are of my own or those of my guests, and don't reflect the views of any current or former employers, clients, or partners. We might reference tools, platforms, or companies, but nothing shared here should be taken as fact, endorsement, or criticism. Do your own research and always consult your team or legal counsel when making any business decisions. This content is not legal, financial, or business advice. It's just us sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and how we've learned from both. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.